They're moving in. My mom, my sister, and her kids. It's decided. This house is perfect. Don't argue, Marcus said, like it was his to give. My name is Evelyn, and I just brought him to the house I bought on my own. He hadn't paid a cent, hadn't known about it until this morning. I thought surprising him would feel romantic, powerful, like claiming a piece of freedom together. Instead, he stood in the living room I dreamed of for 10 years, declaring it open season for his family. I didn't scream. I didn't ask questions. I didn't beg him to reconsider. I walked past him, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch. The autumn wind bit at my cheeks as I looked out at the garden I'd envisioned planting herbs in. The air tasted sharper, like something had shifted. Inside, Marcus was still talking, making plans. But I wasn't listening. I was already making my own. Before all this, before the keys, the silence, the storm, I was a girl with sketches in her notebook and stars in her eyes. I used to spend hours imagining spaces, rearranging furniture in my head, collecting color swatches, dreaming of homes that breathed peace and light. I studied interior design in college, top of my class, already lined up for a junior position at a boutique firm downtown. I wanted to create beauty. I wanted to build sanctuaries. Then I met Marcus. He wasn't loud or flashy, just warm, grounded. When he smiled, the world felt less chaotic. He made me laugh during studio critiques, walked me home with his hand gently at my back, remembered my coffee order. When he talked about family, about loyalty, about building a life together, I believed him. So when he said his mother wasn't well and he wanted to move back to his hometown, I didn't hesitate. I gave up the job, packed up my sketches, followed him, heart first, logic second. We moved in with his family temporarily, or so I thought. His mother, Dolores, ruled the house with a quiet iron hand. His younger sister, Sophia, was 21, rebellious and chaotic, always starting something and never finishing anything. But in the beginning, I didn't mind. I was in love. I wanted to belong. I cooked, I cleaned, I fixed leaky faucets, helped with bills, sat with Dolores at the doctor's office, and took Sophia to job interviews she never followed through on. I decorated the house with thrift store finds and DIY art projects. Everyone said I had a touch. Marcus was kind then, thoughtful. He brought home flowers once a month, took me on long drives, whispered that I was the glue holding everyone together. He worked long hours, but he came home to me. At night, when the house was quiet, we'd lie in bed and talk about our future, about having our own place, about how this was all temporary. He promised we'd leave once things were more stable. I believed him. Years passed. His mother's health fluctuated. Sophia had a baby, then another. Stability never came. And somehow, the word temporary became a faded memory. But I didn't complain. I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought loyalty meant endurance. I convinced myself that putting everyone else first was noble. Even when I missed deadlines for freelance work because Sophia needed babysitting. Even when Dolores questioned every decision I made, from the groceries I bought to the clothes I wore. Even when Marcus began forgetting birthdays, anniversaries, conversations. I told myself it was worth it. That's the thing about slow erosion. You don't notice the cliff disappearing until your toes are hanging off the edge. Looking back, I think the first real fracture happened the day I mentioned going back to work. I was thinking of applying to that design firm again, I said one night as we washed dishes. They've reopened a junior position. Marcus barely looked up. How are you going to do that with everything going on here? I blinked. I'd figure it out. Maybe part-time time. Evelyn, he interrupted, drying his hands. Now's not the time. We have responsibilities. But what he meant was me. The romance faded like a summer curtain left in the sun. At first it was subtle. Dolores would leave sticky notes around the house. Don't forget to clean behind the stove. Sophia's laundry is piling up. Notes never directed at anyone, but always left where I would see them first. Sophia started calling me the house elf, half joking, always in front of others. I laughed the first few times. I told myself they didn't mean it that way, that I was imagining it. But slowly, the expectations grew bolder. One morning I was cleaning up breakfast when Dolores walked in, holding her wrist. I need you to drive me to my appointment this afternoon, she said without looking at me. Sophia has a class and Marcus is busy. It wasn't a question, it was a shift in schedule, mine. Sophia would blast music at night, leaving toys and clothes all over the living room. If I said anything, she'd shrug. You're already cleaning, what's one more thing? Marcus always backed them up. It's just temporary, he'd say. They're going through a lot. Don't make it harder. But I was going through a lot too. No one asked about the dreams I'd put on hold, or the few small projects I tried to take on then canceled because someone needed me to babysit. Marcus made decisions without me. He changed our shared bank account settings. He agreed to lend money to Sophia without discussing it. Once, I found out Dolores was having minor surgery only after she returned home, and I was the one who had to help her recover. I tried to raise concerns gently, but he'd sigh, rub his temples, and say I was too sensitive, or worse, making problems where there weren't any. So I stopped bringing things up. I smiled at family dinners. I washed the same dishes 3 times a day. I carried the emotional weight of a home I didn't own, not in deed, not in voice. And I started to disappear. I stopped dressing up. My hair stayed tied back in the same lazy bun. I drank more coffee just to stay awake. My sketchbook gathered dust. No one noticed. One evening, Marcus came home and asked, "Did you move my mother's slippers from the living room?" I blinked. Yes. I put them in her room so no one tripped. He cut me off. She likes them by the fireplace. Just leave things how she likes them. No thank you, no appreciation, just instruction. That night, I sat alone on the back steps, watching the wind rustle the neighbor's wind chime. The air felt thick, my body present, my spirit absent. I wasn't a wife anymore. I was a fixture, an appliance. One weekend, I tried to reclaim a piece of myself. I signed up for a local design workshop, just 3 evenings, nothing major. I told Marcus with a hopeful smile, expecting maybe a "that's great," or at least a nod. Instead, he frowned. "That's during dinner time. What about Mom and the kids?" I waited for him to say, "We'll figure it out," or "You deserve this," but it never came. He just shook his head like I was being indulgent. I canceled my spot. Another time, I asked if we could take a weekend trip, just us, somewhere quiet. He laughed. "With what money, and who's going to watch everyone?" Always everyone else. Our bedroom. The one place that used to be ours had become a storage space for Sophia's baby gear and Dolores's off-season clothes. I found myself sleeping pressed against the edge of the bed, while Marcus snored beside me, undisturbed by the chaos creeping into every corner. I tried to journal, to pray, to remind myself of the girl who once dreamed of light-filled rooms and warm, intentional spaces, but that girl felt so far away, and I no longer had the strength to reach her. People say if you drop a frog into boiling water, it jumps out, but if you heat the water slowly, it stays until it dies. I wasn't boiling. I was simmering. And no one noticed. Still, I let it go. I shelved the idea. Again. I kept shelving parts of myself until I couldn't remember where I'd placed them. Despite it all, I tried to hold on to the sweetness. The first snowfall we watched from the porch, bundled in one blanket. The anniversary dinner he cooked himself. The time he painted our shared wall lilac because I said it reminded me of calm. There were good moments, but they began to shrink, and I began to shrink with them. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the hallway mirror and not recognize the woman staring back. No color on her lips, no sketches in her notebook, just someone holding everything together, barely. But even then, I didn't think of leaving. I thought of fixing. Because I didn't come from a family that gave up. I came from women who endured, who smiled through cracked voices and tired hands. And I loved him. God, I loved him. Even as he started coming home later, even as his words grew shorter, even as the weight of his family became mine alone to carry. Until the day I realized I'd built a life that didn't have room for me in it. I started picking up online interior design jobs quietly, in between house chores when no one noticed. What began as a small outlet for my forgotten passion turned into something more. Clients loved my work. They referred me to friends, left glowing reviews, even paid premium rates for custom ideas. Bit by bit, my name got passed around, and with it, money came in, steady, honest, mine. No one knew, not even Marcus. I saved in silence, squirreling away every payment, every bonus. It wasn't much at first, but it grew faster than I ever thought, faster than my own confidence. And then one day, I saw the listing. A small house on the edge of town, modest, weathered with chipped paint and a wild lemon tree in front. But it had a wide porch and warm afternoon light and something else, potential. I visited alone, twice, then 3 more times. Eventually, I made an offer. I signed every document in my name. Evelyn, no Marcus, no shared anything. I picked the lilac paint in the living room just because I loved it. I chose light sheer curtains and spent hours hanging them. I arranged a tiny reading nook by the window, with a second-hand chair and a basket for books. And when it all felt real, I brought Marcus. He looked around, impressed. "Wow, you did all this?" I nodded. "Yes, I bought it." At first he seemed stunned. "It's actually really nice, peaceful, spacey, better than our place." I smiled, heart full. But then he stepped into the hallway, muttering, calculating. "This could work." I frowned. "What could work?" "For Mom and Sophia," he said casually. "They're crammed back there, you know that. This place is perfect. Room for the kids, quiet for Mom." My hands went cold. "I bought this for us," I said quietly. He laughed. "Babe, it's a great solution. You don't want them to suffer, do you? I already told them. They'll come this afternoon." I froze. "You told them to move in?" "Yeah, I told them we'd get things ready. Can you go to the store? We'll need tea for Mom, snacks for the kids. Extra linens maybe. You'll know what to get." And just like that, he kissed my forehead and walked out the door, as if nothing happened. I was left standing in the house I had built alone, holding the keys that suddenly meant nothing. He hadn't asked, not what this house meant to me, not if I wanted guests, not even if I was okay. I wandered through each room. The lavender scent I'd placed in the reading nook now seemed too soft, too quiet. The kids would storm through here with sticky fingers and loud voices. I stared at my handmade curtain rods, my personal mugs, my little shelf of tea. Soon it would all be buried in someone else's clutter. I sat down on the rug. My chest felt hollow. This was not a shared win. It was mine, and they were moving in as if it were a family decision. The hours crawled. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave. Instead, I stayed. Listened to the silence, to the voice inside me that whispered, "Not again." I didn't know what I would do. But I knew I couldn't go back to being invisible. Let them come. Let them try. They'd find someone new sitting in this house, someone who would no longer disappear. As I sat there, the sun dipped lower, casting soft gold on the floorboards. I had dreamed of evenings like this. Calm, uninterrupted, mine. Instead, I was bracing for invasion. I imagined Dolores walking in, already taking charge, Sophia dropping bags without asking, kids running through the hallways shouting, tugging, leaving toys in every corner. And Marcus, laughing, saying it was all part of being a family. I used to believe that too. But lately, family had begun to feel like a cage, one where I cooked, cleaned, nodded, smiled, and shrank. I remembered the first time Marcus told me he loved me, how safe I felt, how sure. And now, I wasn't even sure he saw me. He saw a house, a solution, a caretaker. Not Evelyn. Not the woman who rebuilt her confidence one client at a time, who chose paint swatches like poetry, who saved every penny while hiding receipts just to avoid questions. I rose from the rug and walked to the kitchen. The mugs I had placed in pairs suddenly seemed naive, romantic even. What would happen when Dolores arrived and reorganized everything? When Sophia declared this or that corner for her children? Would they ask? No, they never did. I opened the pantry and stood silently. I wasn't going shopping. Not for them. Not for this. And yet I didn't move. My body was caught between grief and defiance. This house was mine. Even if they came. Even if they unpacked. Even if they walked through that door like they owned it. I would stay. And this time, I wouldn't be silent. Not anymore. The sky outside began to fade into a deep blue. Any minute now, I knew the car would pull up, doors would slam, voices would rise. But I stayed seated by the window, fingers curled around the edge of the cushion, heartbeat steady. I didn't need to slam doors or scream. I didn't need to beg him to see me. All I needed was to hold my ground. This was the house I built. And I was still here. If they wanted to step in, they'd have to face the new version of me, not the silent helper they once depended on, but the woman who remembered how to choose herself. The doorbell would ring, and I would decide if I answered. This time, the choice was mine. The door closed behind them with a thud, and suddenly, I was alone. The house was still bare, no couch, no table, just unfinished walls and the cold breath of empty rooms. I sat down on the tile floor, knees pulled to my chest. The chill seeped through my skin, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I felt hollow. Not because they had come, but because I had finally seen everything clearly. For years, I told myself I was doing it for love, for family, that each sacrifice was temporary, that my time would come. But now, in this space I fought so hard to create, I saw the truth. I was never part of their future. I was their solution. A free babysitter, a silent housekeeper, a quiet wife who smiled and nodded and made everyone else's comfort her mission. No one asked if I was tired, no one noticed when I gave up piece after piece of myself. All those dreams of design, of independence, of something that had my name on it, they'd been smothered under casseroles, shopping lists, and emergencies that always seemed more urgent than my life. And still, I stayed. Until now. I stared at the ceiling, breathing through the ache in my chest. This house wasn't much, but it was mine. And in this silence, I finally heard the truth of my own voice. I was done being a footnote in my own story. Marcus had brought them here without asking, without pausing to wonder how I felt. He assumed, like always, that I would agree, that I would bend, that I would make it work. But this time, I wouldn't. Not out of spite. But because I couldn't go back to being that woman again. I stood slowly, joints stiff from the floor. I walked to the window, looking out at the fading light. This wasn't over. But it was beginning, my beginning. And this time, I was choosing me. I thought about the time I gave up my first client because Sophia needed help with her newborn. I thought about the sketches I threw away because there was no space at the dinner table for my work. I thought about the praise Marcus gave me for being so supportive, while never once asking what I had sacrificed. And it hurt. Not in the sharp, sudden way that betrayal usually lands, but in the slow, deep ache of realizing your life has never really been yours. I wasn't a partner, I was an afterthought. A buffer, a convenient extension of someone else's needs. I looked around the empty house, its bare walls echoing everything I'd buried, my ambition, my joy, my voice. They said I was lucky, that I had a good husband, a place to live, a family. But what kind of luck silences your soul? No more. I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out a small can of paint I'd bought for the porch trim. The brush was stiff, its bristles unused. I dipped it into the white, thick paint and walked to the front door. Each stroke across the wood felt like reclaiming space. By the time the words dropped private property, no entry without permission, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't angry. I was awake. They could knock, they could shout, but I wouldn't open unless they asked, unless they saw me. Really saw me. As someone who had built something alone, as someone who mattered. When Marcus returned, I would tell him everything. Not with tears, not with rage, but with truth. And if he didn't understand, it'd still be okay. Because now, I understood myself. I imagined him standing there, key in hand, confused by the locked door. Dolores huffing in outrage, Sophia frowning like I had broken some unspoken rule. Let them feel a fraction of what I had carried for years. This was no longer about comfort or keeping peace. This was about truth. I would no longer apologize for my boundaries. I would no longer explain why I needed space. I didn't need permission to protect what I built. As the light faded outside, I finally made myself dinner, out something small, just for me. I ate on the floor, cross-legged, like a woman rebuilding from scratch. And in the stillness of that quiet, empty home, I smiled. Not because I was happy, but because I was free. Whatever came next, I would face it. Not as someone's wife, not as a helper, but as Evelyn. And Ellen was done being quiet. Evelyn didn't scream. She didn't beg or plead. When Marcus left the house that morning, humming as he headed out to help his mother and sister pack, Evelyn stood in the middle of her bare new home and did the only thing she could. She got to work. First, she changed the locks. The clink of metal, the scent of oil from the new bolts. These were small things, but to her they sounded like armor being strapped on. Each twist of the screwdriver was a small declaration. This is mine. She had called a local locksmith early, right after Marcus left, and watched closely as he worked, ensuring every lock turned with precision. When he left, she stood by the door and locked it again, just to hear the solid, certain click. Then she found the old can of white paint she had brought with her and, with slow, purposeful strokes, painted a simple wooden board she'd salvaged from the shed. The sun was hot on her neck as she worked in the yard barefoot on the patchy grass. Once the background dried, she knelt and painted black letters in thick black strokes. She nailed it onto the front gate and stepped back to look. Her message stood proud. Back inside, the house was still mostly empty, but Evelyn saw it differently now. Not as a blank canvas for someone else's comfort, but as a sacred space waiting to reflect her. She opened the few boxes she had brought, unwrapping objects that had waited patiently for years. An old ceramic lamp she found at a flea market, a mustard yellow blanket her grandmother had knitted, and a framed photo of a younger Evelyn, smiling, sun-kissed, confident. She placed it on the kitchen shelf. Then she moved to the bedroom. The mattress on the floor was temporary, but she covered it with crisp white sheets and a quilt with deep forest green stitching. She hung gauzy curtains that caught the breeze and let soft light spill into the room. She placed her favorite mug on the window ledge, next to a tiny succulent she kept alive through long winters. Every gesture was quiet, deliberate. She didn't need anyone's approval. For once, she wasn't asking if this color would match someone else's taste or if the layout would make guests comfortable. She was building a home that felt like her, lightly, gentle, grounded. While Marcus was out, probably chatting excitedly with his mother about how great the backyard would be for Beatrice, Evelyn prepared for what she knew was coming. He had left assuming she would spend the day preparing groceries and cleaning, getting ready to welcome his family. But instead of groceries, she had stocked up on something else: courage. She practiced what she would say in the mirror. Not loud, not emotional, just clear, just true. She reminded herself that she didn't need to explain why she deserved her own space. She just needed to say it. "I didn't buy this house for guests," she whispered to herself. "I didn't spend years sacrificing just to share my dream without choice." She sat at the small table by the window, sipping tea as the shadows lengthened outside. Every sound, the wind brushing the trees, the hum of distant traffic, felt sharper, clearer. She wasn't distracted, she was awake. Her thoughts weren't spiraling, they were anchoring. She looked around the home. No, it wasn't finished. But it didn't have to be. She had laid the foundation, and this time, it was hers. She walked to the front door and locked it again, not out of fear, but out of certainty. From her desk drawer, she pulled out a small folder. Inside were the property documents. Her name alone. She placed it on the dining table. It wasn't to prove anything to Marcus. It was a reminder to herself. I earned this. As she folded her tea-stained napkin and cleared the single cup from the table, her phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. She didn't reply. Instead, she took one last walk through the house. Her fingers brushed along the wall, pausing over fresh paint. She adjusted the angle of the photo frame, plumped the pillow on the window seat, straightened the sign on the gate outside. Each movement was a final rehearsal for her declaration. She wouldn't shout, she wouldn't cry. But when that car door slammed, when the footsteps echoed up her walk, when the knock finally came, she would open the door and say, with quiet strength, "No." The car pulled up just as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the gravel path. It was louder than necessary. Doors slammed, voices buzzed with excitement. Beatrice's giggles pierced the air as Sophia struggled with an overstuffed duffel. Marcus led the pack, grinning like a man proudly unveiling a prize. Evelyn stood behind the gauzy curtain, watching from the living room window. She didn't blink. She didn't move. She had already done everything she needed to. The front gate clanked when Marcus reached for it, blocked. He frowned, then noticed the large black letters painted boldly on the wooden board Evelyn had hung the day before. "New property, no traffic, no trolls." Sophia read it aloud, her voice laced with disbelief. "What is this, a joke?" Marcus chuckled. "She probably forgot to take it down, let me call her." But Evelyn had already stepped out. She emerged onto the porch, the screen door creaking gently behind her. She wasn't dressed for confrontation, just a soft gray sweater and jeans, hair pulled back, but her presence was immovable, calm, unshakable. Beatrice waved cheerfully. "Hi, Annie Evelyn." Evelyn offered the child a soft smile, but her eyes never left Marcus. "You didn't call ahead," she said, voice level. "We're family," Marcus replied with a light laugh. "No need for formalities, right?" Evelyn's gaze held steady. "Actually, there is." Sophia's smile dropped. Her voice hardened. "We've been packing all day. We're exhausted. Open the gate, Evelyn." One word, quiet. But it struck like a bolt of lightning. Marcus blinked. "What?" Evelyn stepped closer, her hand still by her side. "This is my house," she said. "I bought it. paid for every brick, and I never agreed to anyone moving in. But we talked about this, Marcus said, forcing a smile. It's the best solution for everyone. For you, Evelyn corrected, not for me. Sophia crossed her arms. You were seriously going to leave us standing here with a child? You should have made other arrangements, Evelyn replied. This is not a surprise visit. You were told the house was mine. You assumed I would cave like always. Marcus stepped closer. Evelyn, don't do this. Let's just talk inside. I already said everything I needed to. You made plans without me. You brought your family here without my consent. You thought my silence was agreement. It wasn't. Come on, be reasonable, he muttered, his voice low and irritated. Evelyn raised an eyebrow. Reasonable? You told me not to argue. You made decisions for my life like I wasn't even in it. That's not reason. That's control. Sophia shifted uncomfortably. Beatrice tugged on her mother's sleeve, sensing the tension. Mariana, silent until now, stepped forward. This isn't how we treat family, she snapped. No, Evelyn said, her voice quiet but firm. This is how I treat myself. With respect, something none of you have shown me. Mariana's mouth opened, but Marcus stopped her with a hand. His face had lost all its bravado. What remained was disbelief. What are we supposed to do now, he asked, voice subdued. That's not for me to solve, Evelyn said. I've spent years fixing everyone's problems except my own. That ends today. Silence fell like a blanket. Even the breeze seemed to pause. Evelyn stepped back. Please leave, this is private property. No one enters without my permission. With that, she turned, ascended the porch steps, and closed the door behind her. The lock clicked audibly. Outside, Beatrice began to cry. Sophia started pacing. Unbelievable, after everything we've done for her. Evelyn, behind the locked door, didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her silence said it all. Marcus stood frozen, eyes fixed on the closed house, his hand clenched around his mother's suitcase handle. She's bluffing, he muttered. She'll open the door. But time passed. No door opened. No voice called back. Evelyn wasn't bluffing. She had drawn the line, and meant it. Mariana turned to Marcus. You said she agreed. She would have, he murmured, now unsure. She always does. Well, she's not now, Sophia snapped. So what, we just leave? Beatrice cried louder. I'm hungry. No one moved. Finally, Mariana sighed sharply. We're not welcome here, let's go. Marcus didn't argue. He picked up the bags one by one, slower now, heavier. For the first time, he looked small, a man realizing too late that what he lost wasn't an accident, but the consequence of entitlement. Inside, Evelyn leaned against the door, her breath calm but shallow. Her hands trembled slightly, but a quiet smile played on her lips. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt free. I watched through the curtain as they left, his mother, his sister, and Marcus himself dragging behind them the heavy suitcases they were so sure would be welcomed. The gate remained locked. The Province Works sign shimmered under the afternoon sun. None of them looked back. And I didn't need them to. That evening, I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear that familiar voice making excuses again, pleading in the name of family. I sat in my worn armchair, tea in hand, feeling something I hadn't in years, light. But I knew, somewhere across the city, someone was just starting to feel truly empty. The next morning, Marcus called, repeatedly. I didn't answer. The texts came like waves. Just talk to me, I'll fix this. I didn't think you'd really do it. Please, just let me explain. I didn't reply. I couldn't bring myself to delete the messages, but I didn't want to carry them either. A few days later, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that the three of them were now back in their old apartment. Cramped, dusty, and without air conditioning. Marcus didn't speak much, but his mother was livid, blaming him for trusting me too much. Sophia broke down in the middle of the night, shouting that I'd betrayed them. Marcus said nothing. He didn't defend anyone this time. For the first time, he began to understand what it felt like to be ignored, to be burdened with blame, to be expected to endure. I knew he was hurting, but I wasn't there to comfort him anymore. I realized my pain didn't need validation to be real. It only needed me to stop denying it. That night, his name lit up on my phone again. I turned the screen face down. But then, another message arrived. No long explanations, no defenses. Just 3 simple words. I was wrong. I read those words over and over. They didn't earn forgiveness, but for the first time he was listening. I didn't reply. The next day, I went to the market. The flower vendor I always visited smiled at me. "You look happier these days," she said. I smiled back, genuinely, this time. I bought a bouquet of sunflowers, bold and unbending. Later that night, I opened my phone again and found a photo message, a handwritten letter, in Marcus's familiar scrawl. "I didn't see you. I didn't understand you. I didn't value you. You owe me nothing. I only hope that one day you might forgive me, if I've earned it." I saved the photo in a private folder. I didn't delete it, but I didn't respond either. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that today, I chose myself, and that has never felt more right. Deep down, I'm still the woman who once loved Marcus deeply, but love can't be the reason to accept endless sacrifice. If that day hadn't happened, if I hadn't stood up, I might still be just a shadow in my own life. Now, I don't need anyone to prove my worth. I've already done that for myself. And I hope, even if it's late, Marcus learns to do the same for himself. Several weeks passed before I agreed to meet Marcus again. This time it was at my house, my sanctuary, and I was the one who chose the moment. He arrived alone, without assumptions, only a quiet hope. He looked different, not broken, but softer, no longer wrapped in the armor of certainty. We sat at my small kitchen table. The curtains swayed gently in the breeze, and the scent of chamomile lingered from my afternoon tea. He didn't speak right away, and for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. "I'm sorry," he said at last, his voice hoarse. "Not just for what happened, but for everything, for not listening, for treating you like an extension of everyone else's needs." I believed him. But forgiveness isn't just about words. It's about action, about rebuilding what was broken with better hands. "I'm willing to try again," I told him, "but under 3 conditions." He nodded, listening in a way he never had before. First, respect. That means no more decisions made for me, no assumptions. I'm your partner, not your assistant. Second, boundaries. This house, my time, my work, none of it is negotiable. We talk about things, we don't impose. And third, communication, real communication, no orders, no silence. We speak, we listen. He nodded after each one, tears shining at the corners of his eyes. "I can do that," he whispered. "I want to." That day didn't end with grand declarations or dramatic gestures. It ended with 2 people in a quiet room, starting something small and cautious, but honest. We didn't go back to the way things were. We moved forward slowly, intentionally, and this time on equal ground. This time, I held the pen to my own story. And I knew I would never give it up again. In the weeks that followed, Marcus didn't just say he'd changed, he showed it. He didn't push to reclaim space in my life. He simply asked to witness it. He learned the rhythm of my silences, the things I treasured, my sketchbooks, my slow mornings, the peace of solitude. His apologies came not through speeches, but presence. He fixed a squeaky door I hadn't gotten to, dropped off groceries with notes that read, "No pressure, just care." Quiet acts. Real ones. And me. I made space for healing. I didn't rush back into his arms. I didn't erase the years I'd felt unseen, but I also didn't shut the door. I rediscovered myself, not just in this house, but in the world. I joined a local art group. I hosted my first online interior design workshop. I took long walks without reporting back to anyone. I lived. Marcus stayed patient. He cheered when I landed my first full design contract. He listened, truly listened, when I spoke about light and layout. He didn't interrupt with news about his mother. He asked about my day. Our conversations shifted from logistics to dreams, from chores to purpose. One night, as we painted my hallway, I looked at him, paint on his cheek, and said, "You know, this doesn't mean I'll ever go back to who I was, right?" He smiled softly. "I know, and I wouldn't want you to." That's when I knew we had a chance. Because this time, I wasn't giving myself up to fit into someone else's world. I was inviting someone into mine, on my terms. And I would never give that up again.